3 children, 3 heirs, 3 people who should have loved and protected. But that afternoon, they made the biggest mistake of their lives. They abandoned their own parents, Rosa and Antonio, on a deserted road, under a merciless sun. No water, no food, no mercy. They had no idea that, by doing this, they were throwing away 20 million REAIS, and the last bit of humanity they still had. Before we continue, if you believe that no one deserves to be discarded, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. This helps this work reach many more people. Now take a deep breath, because today's story is strong, it's real, and it will move you deeply. Rosa looked around, seeing nothing but dust and the burning glow of the sun reflecting off the hot asphalt. The feeling of abandonment was so heavy that it seemed like a physical weight pressing down on her tired shoulders. She tried to understand how 3 children raised with so much love could simply leave them there, as if they were objects that no longer served any purpose. Antonio breathed with difficulty, feeling his heart race as he struggled to stay upright. Every step he tried to take was stopped by dizziness that seemed to pull him back toward the ground. He looked at his wife with a mixture of pain and remorse, as if silently apologizing for not being able to protect her from that situation. The hot wind blew, like a cruel warning that the day would not be easy. They needed to walk, but there was no clear direction to follow. Rosa held her husband's arm and suggested they sit for a moment to gather their thoughts. The heat seemed to grow endlessly, but hope insisted on breathing, weak but alive. Earlier that morning, before everything happened, Rosa had woken up with a heaviness in her chest. It wasn't physical pain, but an emotional warning she had learned to recognize after so many recent disappointments. The silence in the house had a strange tone, as if something was about to collapse, and every step she took seemed to echo like a premonition. While preparing breakfast, she tried to keep the routine alive, even knowing the children would criticize her for anything she did. 3 eggs for 4 people. Yet still Sandra appeared complaining, saying it was wasteful to feed 2 elderly people who, according to her, contributed absolutely nothing anymore. Rosa swallowed her tears as she stirred the food. With the sound of complaints filling the kitchen, Rosa realized that the home was no longer the same. The house that once held laughter and conversation was now filled with cold stares and cutting words. Her heart tightened at the thought that maybe, somehow, she had lost her children to a world she no longer recognized. While Rosa and Antonio slept, the 3 children gathered in the living room. Sandra, the oldest, started the conversation with a hard, impatient look, saying the situation had become unbearable. Enrique agreed, thinking only of the growing expenses, and Mauro added that he had his own life to take care of. There was no love in that conversation, only calculated coldness. They talked about their parents as if they were a logistical problem, not human beings who had raised them. Sandra suggested taking them for a drive, and none of the brothers bothered to question the idea. It was as if their conscience had been switched off, as if compassion had evaporated into the heavy air of that silent night. Before going to their rooms, the 3 had already decided their parents' fate. None hesitated. None thought about what they were about to do. None imagined the impact that choice would have on their lives. Leave a comment saying what you think you have done in their place. The parents got into the car believing they were going to a doctor's appointment, just as Sandra had said. Rosa had even prepared a small bag with documents, thinking it would be just a routine visit. But as the city faded behind them and the road grew more deserted, uneasiness began to creep into her like a shadow. Antonio watched through the window, trying to remember if they had been down that road before. The landscape looked endless, filled with dried trees and cracked earth from the drought. He noticed the children avoided eye contact, looking only straight ahead, like people carrying out a task they didn't want to face. When the car stopped abruptly in the middle of nowhere, Rosa felt her heart pound. The children asked them to get out for a moment, saying they needed to adjust the engine. But the truth revealed itself when the doors closed and the car sped off, kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. The silence that followed was so sudden it felt like a slap in the face. Rosa looked around, searching for some logical explanation for what had just happened, but found only the emptiness of the road and the distant echo of the car driving away. She called for her children, but her voice was swallowed by the suffocating heat. Antonio tried to take a few steps after the car, but his body no longer had the strength for long distances. He felt his legs tremble, his chest tighten, and his breath falter. Rosa rushed to help him sit down, holding his face while trying to hide her own desperation. She knew she needed to stay strong. The sun burned without mercy, making each minute harder than the last. The water had run out hours before, and the road stretched endlessly in all directions. Even so, Rosa refused to give up. In her mind, she had only one goal: keep Antonio alive, even if it meant using the last drops of hope. Rosa scanned the horizon, believing she had seen something move. For a moment she thought it was just a mirage, but the figure slowly began to approach. Her heart raced, torn between hope and fear. Anyone out there could mean salvation or more danger. She stayed alert. Antonio tried to stay conscious, but his eyes felt heavy, as if his whole body were giving in to exhaustion. He squeezed his wife's hand and whispered her name, begging her not to leave him. Rosa stroked his face, promising they would do whatever it took to survive, even if they had to crawl to find help. The figure became clearer. It was a truck driver slowing down as he noticed the abandoned couple. Rosa raised her arms, trembling with weakness, and shouted for help. The driver finally stopped, quickly getting down when he saw the gravity of the situation. If you've made it this far, leave your like to support this content. The truck driver ran to them and immediately offered water when he saw their critical state. Rosa drank only enough to regain some strength and asked that Antonio be helped first. The driver was impressed by the resilience of that woman who, even on the verge of fainting, put her husband's well-being above her own. They were helped into the truck cabin. The cool air brought relief, but fear still dominated Rosa's heart. The driver called for medical assistance as he accelerated down the road toward a support station. The ride felt endless, and every second was a battle against the despair threatening to consume her. When they arrived at the station, a team of volunteers rushed to help. The couple was welcomed with care, as if they had finally found a safe place. Rosa held Antonio's hand and thanked the driver with a trembling voice. The man just smiled, saying that anyone with a heart would have done the same. Rosa felt her throat burn every time she remembered the last words exchanged with her daughter. She didn't hate Sandra, but it hurt to look back and realize that, at some point in life, a mother's love had stopped being enough to keep the family together. The dusty road seemed to mirror the chaos inside her soul. Antonio walked beside her, breathing with difficulty, but tried to stay firm so he wouldn't worry his wife even more. He whispered softly that everything would be all right, even though he had no control over anything. But it was all he could offer, a fragile promise, held together only by love. Rosa looked at the horizon and saw the heat trembling above the asphalt. "Where did we go wrong, Antonio?" she murmured, her voice breaking. He gently held her hand, even though his strength was fading. "We went wrong by loving too much those who loved us too little," he replied. And they kept walking, trying to believe they would be seen, that they would be found. Back in the city, Sandra tried to maintain the cold attitude she had adopted in recent months, but her mind kept revisiting the image of her fragile parents walking aimlessly. The silence inside the car felt heavier than any argument she had ever had with them. Something inside her was beginning to twist. The middle brother, Marcelo, tried to rationalize everything. He told himself that the old folks would meet an inevitable fate anyway, that what they did was merely an anticipation. But his leg wouldn't stop trembling as he stared out the window. Deep down, fear of the consequences was destroying him. João, the oldest, tried to stay in control of the situation. He drove with firmness, eyes fixed on the road, as if running away from the scene would erase the guilt. But inside, he knew nothing would ever be the same. He took a deep breath and said, it was the right thing, it had be done. But even he doubted his own words. As they walked, Rosa gathered the courage to reveal a secret she had kept for years. She looked at her husband, took a deep breath, and told him that the lawyer had called days earlier with important news. Antonio stopped for a moment, staring at her in confusion, waiting for her to continue. She explained that an old compensation from a labor lawsuit, something they thought was lost, had finally been released. and the amount was much greater than they had imagined. Rosa hesitated before revealing the number, but finally said, "Antonio, it's 20 million." He nearly fell over from shock. Antonio held her hand and, despite the absurd situation they were in, let out a nervous laugh. "So our children gave up on us on the money?" Rosa simply nodded with tears in her eyes. And in that moment, something stronger than sadness filled them. The certainty that, even in old age, they were far more valuable than their children ever realized. The heat grew relentlessly, turning every step into a battle. The sun beat down on their fragile skin, and even the wind seemed too hot to offer relief. Rosa began to struggle for breath, placing a hand on her chest as she tried to keep pace. Antonio noticed immediately and stopped, holding her, but he too felt his head spinning, his vision darkening, as if his body was giving up inch by inch. The road was deserted, silent, and the only sound was their irregular breathing. Without warning, Antonio staggered and fell to his knees. Rosa panicked, trying to lift him, but his body felt as heavy as lead. "Antonio! Antonio, please!" she cried, her voice breaking into sobs. But her husband no longer responded. Despair crashed over her like a brutal wave. Then a distant noise broke the silence. The rattling sound of an old car approaching, groaning as if every part was about to fall apart. Rosa wiped her tears and raised her arm, begging for help. The car slowed and stopped a few meters ahead. A simple man stepped out, wearing worn-out clothes and carrying a tired but kind expression. He rushed to them, quickly assessed the situation, and helped lift Antonio, who was still unconscious. "Let's get him there right away." "Hold on, ma'am," the man said firmly. He placed them both in the back seat and sped off, even though the car coughed and threatened to die at every gear change. Rosa held her husband in her arms, as if holding the entire world. The road no longer felt so cruel. Someone had finally stopped to see them. Meanwhile, in the children's home, the atmosphere began to shift. Marcelo paced around the living room nonstop, restless, saying that something about this wasn't right. The words stumbled out of him, as if his conscience had finally awakened after years of silence. Sandra tried to stay firm, but her face began to crumble. Her hands trembled, and she no longer seemed capable of defending the idea that it was the best for everyone. Something inside her pleaded to go back, to look behind, to undo it. João, however, insisted on maintaining a hard posture. But even he began to feel a growing discomfort, as if the house itself had suddenly become too small. He looked at the clock at the door at his siblings and realized that their silence was a heavy judgment, impossible to ignore. The man who rescued them brought Rosa and Antonio to a small municipal hospital. Nurses rushed to help when they saw Antonio unconscious. Rosa held his hand tightly, afraid that this might be the end. But there was still hope. After some tests, the doctor approached, speaking seriously but compassionately. He suffered a collapse from exhaustion and dehydration, but he arrived in time. If he had delayed 20 more minutes, Rosa didn't let the doctor finish. She simply cried with relief. Then at the reception desk, she informed them that she needed to contact a lawyer. The receptionist, curious, asked if it was about an important document. Rosa only nodded. Her life was about to change, and so were her children's. Back at the house, the children's phone began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. They ignored it until João answered, irritated. On the other end, the calm voice of the doctor explained what happened and asked them to come to the hospital. A fearful silence filled the room. Sandra's legs nearly gave out. Marcelo lost his breath, as if someone had punched him in the stomach. And João, for the first time, lost control. "They were found?" he asked, stunned, as if it didn't make sense. But it did, and it hurt. The doctor explained that Rosa also needed to speak to them about an important document. João hung up with trembling hands. The truth was coming, and they had no idea how devastating it would be. When the 3 arrived at the hospital, they found Rosa sitting beside her husband's bed. He was already conscious, though weak. The mother looked at her children with eyes full of tears, not only of sadness, but of deep disappointment. The children tried to justify themselves, creating fragile excuses, But Rosa raised her hand, asking for silence. She took a deep breath and spoke calmly, yet firmly. You abandoned us to die. And yet, here we are. Not because of you, but in spite of you. Antonio added, with a weak but truthful voice. The love we gave you was wasted. But the justice of life, that never fails. You will understand this very soon. Rosa then stood up and handed the lawyer, who had just arrived, the documents of the $1 million compensation. He explained to the children, without sugarcoating anything, that the parents had decided to donate most of the money to the hospital and to the man who rescued them, and that the children would receive nothing. The silence that followed was cold, suffocating, devastating. Sandra cried. Marcelo collapsed into a chair, and João stood frozen, staring at his parents as if he were looking at ghosts. The decision was final and fair. Rosa then turned the camera over to the viewer and said with a firm voice, value those who love you, because time charges a high price from those who throw love away. Pause. And before we finish, remember, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us what you would do in Rosa and Antonio's place. Your opinion makes all the difference.